The Battle of Los Angeles, The Mass Panic of 1940 to Part 1. Shadow over the city of Angels, February 1942, Los Angeles. Usually ablaze with lights and carefree energy, was plunged into an uneasy twilight. Just 3 months earlier, on December 7, 1941, Japanese aircraft had bombed Pearl Harbor, abruptly and brutally drawing the United States into the depths of World War II. Now the Pacific Ocean, once a symbol of boundless opportunity and resort relaxation, seemed ominous, full of hidden threats. Every splash off the California coast could be the periscope of an enemy submarine. Every distant rumble the engine of an Imperial Navy aircraft carrier. The city lived in blackout mode. At night, house windows and storefronts were carefully curtained with thick black fabric, and car headlights were painted blue, leaving only thin slits for light. The streets, usually awash with neon, were plunged into an unnatural, almost rural darkness, broken only by the pale light of the moon and occasional anti-aircraft patrols. The air was thick with fear and suspicion. Newspapers were filled with cartoons depicting the Japanese as caricatures of evil, and rumors of spies of fifth columns were whispered in bars and barbershops. The wave of paranoia reached its peak when President Roosevelt signed the infamous Executive Order 9066, mandating the internment of Japanese Americans. A sense of impending doom hung in the air, thick and sticky like Pacific fog. That night, February 24th to 25th, the sky was clear, dotted with cold, unblinking stars. The first alarm sounded shortly before midnight. Radar picked up an unidentified object a few miles off the coast. Air raid sirens, their wail now familiar, but no less chilling, pierced the night silence. City residents, accustomed to false alarms, took this alarm with particular seriousness. Just a few hours earlier, the Coast Guard had reported a possible enemy submarine attack on the Santa Barbara oil fields. War, it seemed, was knocking at California's door. Lieutenant Jack Malone, commander of an anti-aircraft battery located in the hills of Hollywood, received the first alarm over the field telephone. His battery of 3.7-inch guns was one of many forming a defensive ring around the city. Jack, a native of Oklahoma, a calm and reasonable man who had dreamed of becoming an engineer before the war, now clutched a pair of binoculars, peering into the dark southwestern sky. "See anything, Private?" His voice was tense but steady. Private Miller, an 18-year-old boy from Iowa, raised his face to the sky, his fingers nervously drumming on the cold metal of his anti-aircraft machine gun. "Nothing, Lieutenant. Just stars and, hell, I don't know. There, just to the left of Polaris, there's some kind of shimmer. A planet, maybe?" Jack raised his binoculars to his eyes. The sky was empty, but the airwaves were chaotic. Reports from lookouts, Coast Guardsmen, and patrol plane pilots contradicted each other. Some saw unidentified flying objects, others reported flashes of light. Still others reported a group of bombers moving at low altitude. No clear coordinates, no confirmation. And then, at 2:15 a.m., came the command Jack dreaded most. "Fire alert. Target in Sector 7. Open fire." Jack's heart pounded. He was a soldier, and an order was an order. But firing into nothing? His rational mind protested. However, the first shots were already thundering around him. A blinding flash shot up from the battery in Long Beach, and a moment later, somewhere high above the ocean, the first shrapnel burst with a dull pop. "Lieutenant," Miller shouted, his eyes glazed with horror. "What are we doing?" Jack looked at his men, at their pale, frightened faces, illuminated by the reflection of distant explosions. He saw them not as soldiers, but as men like himself, students, farmers, workers thrown into the crucible of war. Hesitation could be seen as cowardice or, worse, treason. "Battery, aim for Sector 7. Altitude." He hesitated, unsure what to say. "Altitude 5,000 feet. Fire." The ground shook. His own gun emitted a deafening roar, deafening his ears. A red-hot shell casing was thrown backward, showering the earth at their feet. Jack raised his binoculars again, trying to make out anything in this inferno. The sky, calm just a moment ago, was now streaked with dozens of searchlight beams, darting and intersecting, forming a gigantic cathedral of light. At the intersections, he sometimes glimpsed something to spot, a shadow, a reflection. But an airplane? A formation of bombers? Nothing of the sort, and the city below froze. Millions of people, awakened by sirens and the roar of cannon fire, poured out into the streets in fear, peered out of windows, hid in basements. They saw this spectacle, the mad dance of beams, and the countless orange flashes of explosions in the sky. And they believed they were seeing the enemy, that an air battle was taking place right now above their heads, that Japanese bombs were about to rain down on their homes. Panic, pent up over weeks of fear and uncertainty, erupted. Screams, children's cries, prayers all mingled with the deafening symphony of war waged by their own offenders. 5 people in different parts of the city were already falling dead, not from enemy bullets, but from their hearts exploding and the red-hot shrapnel of their own shells falling from the sky. The Battle of Los Angeles had begun. A battle with a ghost. Part 2. Possession by the phantom hell broke loose over Los Angeles. What had begun as a chaotic barrage of gunfire turned into a continuous, insane firestorm. During the hour and a half of the attack, coastal artillery fired approximately 1,400 shells. The sky was strewn with explosions that, as they slowly died down, left behind clouds of smoke that merged into one continuous, dirty cloud. The air filled with the acrid smell of sulfur and hot metal. Jack Malone, standing at his gun, felt less like a soldier than the conductor of an absurd orchestra playing a symphony of madness. His men, initially frightened and hesitant, now acted with mechanical, almost obsessive precision. Fear gave way to a strange, combative ecstasy. They saw the target. Every one of them saw it. "Lieutenant, over there. Big, silvery one." The gunner shouted, cranking the flywheels and firing another burst from his machine gun at an empty space in the sky, where several searchlight beams intersected. "I see it. I've got it in my sights." The loader echoed, loading another heavy shell into the breech. Jack saw nothing, only light, smoke, and shadows, but the echo in his headphones screamed of dozens of targets. One Air Force pilot, alerted, reported pursuing an unidentified object resembling a balloon. Another swore he'd fired on a Japanese bomber, which disappeared in the searchlight beams. The reports were phantasmagorical. Some saw tiny single seaplanes, others a giant airship, still others an entire armada. Down below, in his Silver Lake home, veteran fisherman Arthur Pendleton, a veteran of World War I, watched this madness from his balcony, clutching his well-deserved Purple Heart. His neighbors were panicking, but Arthur stood motionless. His keen eye, trained by years at sea, saw what others missed. "That's nonsense," he muttered under his breath. "They're shooting in the air. No planes. Daddy, get under cover." His daughter called from the living room, her voice breaking with fear. "Calm down, Mary. There's nothing to fear there but our own shrapnel," he replied, not taking his eyes off the sky dot, and then his gaze caught something. At the very epicenter of this apocalypse, in the crosshairs of a dozen beams, hung something. Not an airplane, with its distinct wings and tail. It was more of a glowing, blurry object, like a giant jellyfish floating on the celestial currents. It was enormous and seemed completely indifferent to the hellish fire raging around it. It drifted slowly east, over the city center. Arthur grabbed his old field glasses. The object had no identifying marks, made no sound. It simply was. And in that moment, Arthur Pendleton, skeptic and realist, felt an icy shiver run down his spine. It was unlike anything he had ever seen before. Meanwhile, chaos reigned at Air Defense Headquarters, only slightly less so than in the sky. Generals and colonels leaped from their seats, pointing at the map, picking up the phones. These contradictions reached the point of absurdity. One radar was on its 5th call. Another was clear. Pilots returning from patrol couldn't guarantee a single target. But the pressure was colossal. Civilians, City Hall, the press all were required. The order to start a fire was given in a complete information vacuum based on panic, not facts. The Los Angeles Times newsroom was no less chaotic. Reporters and typesetters scurried between phones and printing presses. Editor-in-Chief Harry Stone clutched the first copy of the morning edition. The headline announced, "Air raid on Los Angeles." But the longer the carnage dragged on, the more doubts crept into his mind. His short correspondent, perched on a rooftop in downtown, reported over the phone, "Harry, I can't see a thing. Not a single damn plane. Just our own planes exploding overhead. Printed as is." Stone barked, tossing the proposal aside. "The city needs to know we're fighting back." But what exactly did they repel? At 3:30 a.m., the gunfire began to subside. The shells were running low. The searchlights, exhausted, continued to sweep the sky, but there was nothing to catch. The shadow they had fought so fiercely for had vanished. At 4:14 a.m., the long-awaited all-clear sounded. A deafening, ringing silence descended, broken only by the crackling of fires caused by falling shrapnel and the distant sirens of ambulances. Jack Malone sank into the globe's crate. His ears were ringing, his body ached with tension, and his soul was empty. He looked at his soldiers. The frenzied gleam in their eyes had faded, replaced by confusion and shame. They had returned tons of ammunition, exposed the city to mortal danger from falling debris. But they couldn't answer a simple question. Who were they shooting at? The city fell silent, listening to the silence. Millions of people, who an hour earlier had been preparing for death, now gazed in bewilderment at the star-studded, serene sky. It was empty. Everything was as empty as it had been at the start of the night. But something had changed forever. The air was thick with not only the smell of gunpowder, but also a heavy, oppressive sense of collective madness, a possession by a ghost in which an entire army and an entire city had come to believe. Part 3, Dawn and Shadow of Doubt. With the first rays of dawn, Los Angeles appeared pitiful and disorientated. The streets were strewn with shards of glass shattered by the shock waves. Here and there, the ruins of barns and houses smoldered, struck by unexploded shells or large fragments of anti-aircraft shells. 5 people were killed, 3 died of heart attacks, unable to bear the horror. 2 were crushed by debris. Dozens were wounded. The city, braced for destruction at the hands of the enemy, found itself scarred by its own defenders. Jack Malone and his battery silently surveyed the position. Shell casings lay piled high round the guns. The ground was scorched and torn. He raised his head to the sky, now clear and serene. A feeling of shame and absurdity choked him. They, soldiers called upon to protect, had staged a phantasmagorical spectacle, firing into nothingness. What would he say to the families of those who died under their protection? A press conference held later that morning only added fuel to the fire. Secretary of the Navy Frank Knox, arriving in the city, told reporters from the doorway it was a false alarm. The alarm was raised out of nervousness. There were no enemy aircraft over the city. The room erupted in indignant cries. How could this be? Thousands of people had seen objects in the searchlights. They were firing at something, weren't they? Then an army general took the floor. His explanation was even more absurd. The panic, he said, could have been caused by commercial aircraft mistaken for enemy aircraft, or perhaps a weather balloon. Questions arose about why, then, 1,400 shells were fired at a harmless balloon. There was no response. The official story was shaky and failed to convince anyone. The authorities, trying to hush up the scandal, looked either incompetent or lying. The newspapers came out with conflicting headlines. The Los Angeles Times ran the famous photograph on the front page, cross searchlight beams, and multiple explosions in the sky, with a headline about an air raid. But in the next issue, the tone shifted to a more measured tone, with questions about what had actually happened. Rumors began to circulate around the city. The most popular of these were that the planes had been Japanese, launched from submarines. But the authorities were covering it up to avoid panic. Or, even more fantastically, that they had been German flying wings from secret bases in South America. But there was a third, strangest theory. It was brought to the editors of a small magazine devoted to paranormal phenomena by that same old fisherman, Arthur Pendleton. He described what he saw, a huge, silent, glowing object, resembling a dirigible, but unlike any aircraft he knew. His story was ridiculed and buried among other evidence, but a seed of doubt had been sown. Days passed, then weeks. The military, seeking to restore their reputation, conducted their own investigation. Their conclusion, published much later, was ambiguous. 1 or more unidentified aircraft may have been over the Los Angeles area. It was a formal reply. No Japanese wreckage was found, and no enemy records of such a sortie existed. The mystery remained unsolved. For Jack Malone, the war didn't end there. He was transferred to the Pacific, where he saw real Japanese pilots and real aerial combat. But nothing could erase that February night from his memory. Before he fell asleep, closing his eyes, he saw that blinding madness in the skies over Los Angeles again and again. He still couldn't find an answer. What was it? A mass hallucination born of fear? A colossal air defense error? Or were they really firing at something? Something that wasn't a Japanese bomber? Decades passed. The Battle of Los Angeles became part of urban folklore, a curious historical episode. But for those who lived through that night, it remained an unhealed wound. a scar on the collective memory. It was a battle in which there was no enemy, but there were losses. A battle waged not for territory, but against one's own fears and the ghosts engendered by war. To this day, looking up at the clear night sky over Los Angeles, it sometimes seems as if, in the crosshairs of a nightclub spotlight or a passing sun, the shadow of that same mysterious object flickers for a moment as silent witness to the night, when the city opened fire on its own imagination and couldn't stop until the shells ran out. And the question, what did they see, hangs in the air, an eternal, unanswerable riddle.